They called him a traitor after one classified mission destroyed his team. For years, Navy SEAL Caleb Mercer lived with a broken memory and a name covered in shame. But his Belgian Malinois K9, Rook, never forgot the truth buried inside Black Hollow. One old military bracelet, one child's hidden message, and one loyal dog would reopen the nightmare. The world said Caleb betrayed his brothers, but Rook remembered who really needed saving. This is the story of a soldier, a forgotten girl, and a promise only God could guide back into the light. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, leave your thoughts after the story, and please like and subscribe to help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep creating more powerful stories. Caleb Mercer had learned to enter every room like it might become a battlefield. Even in Ash Creek Market, with its humming refrigerators, soft country music, and old women comparing soup cans in the canned goods aisle, his eyes moved first to the doors, then the windows, then the corners where a man could stand without being noticed. He did not do it because he wanted trouble. He did it because some part of him had never fully come home. Caleb was a male U.S. Navy SEAL in his early 30s with an angular, rugged face, a sharp jawline, clean-shaven skin, cold blue-gray eyes, and a modern, neat, short undercut haircut with tight faded sides and a short textured top. His disciplined, athletic build made even stillness look controlled. He wore a complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform, matching blouse and trousers properly fitted and fully buttoned, a plain black belt, and plain black combat boots. No helmet, no hat, no sunglasses, no eyewear, no tactical vest, no body armor, no gloves, no headset, no backpack, no weapon, no patches, no extra accessories. To strangers, he looked severe, almost carved out of stone. To the people who watched him from a distance, he looked like a man who had survived something and never explained what it was. But Ash Creek knew small things about Caleb that did not match his cold face. Old Mrs. Dalloway had once found her porch rail repaired before sunrise. A single mother named Karen Blake had discovered a bag of groceries on her steps during the first snow. A boy with a broken bicycle had watched Caleb fix the chain in silence, then walk away before the boy could ask his name. Caleb did not like being thanked. Gratitude made people look at him too closely, and being looked at too closely made old memories stir. At Caleb's left side walked Rook, a full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9, 4 to 5 years old, with a lean muscular build, a deep fawn to mahogany coat, a distinct black facial mask, upright ears, and intense dark amber eyes. Rook wore a tan tactical K9 vest and a simple working dog collar. He moved with controlled purpose, alert and steady, facing the same direction as Caleb, as if both man and dog were still crossing hostile ground. Rook was not nervous. He was disciplined. He did not bark at shopping carts, children, or automatic doors. He noticed them, judged them, dismissed them. Caleb trusted Rook more than he trusted his own sleep. When the nightmares came, Rook knew before Caleb woke. When Caleb's breathing turned sharp, Rook pressed his warm weight against his chest. When Caleb's hands shook after thunder rolled over the mountains, Rook would stand between him and the window as if guarding him from a war that no longer existed except inside him. That afternoon, Caleb had come to Ash Creek Market for coffee, canned beans, dog food, and batteries. Simple things, civilian things, things a man bought when he was trying to pretend his life had normal edges. The market was small, with worn wooden floors, a bell over the front door, faded produce signs, and a narrow checkout counter near the entrance. Behind that counter stood Mabel Crane, a woman in her late 50s with a round, kind face, soft brown eyes, short gray curls, and a habit of speaking gently to people who looked like they might break if spoken to too loudly. Mabel wore a faded blue store apron over a flowered blouse and dark slacks, and she had known Caleb long enough not to ask him questions. "Afternoon, Caleb," she said, scanning the coffee. "Storm coming tonight." Caleb nodded once. "I saw the clouds." Mabel glanced at Rook and smiled. "He saw them first, I bet." Rook's ears flicked at her voice, but his eyes stayed on the front window. Mabel's smile faded a little. "Everything all right?" Caleb reached for his wallet. Usually isn't. It was not a joke exactly, but Mabel gave a small breath that almost became a laugh. She understood that, from Caleb, those 3 words were more conversation than most people got in a week. The bell over the front door rang. Caleb did not turn immediately. He watched the reflection in the glass of the cooler door. An elderly man had entered, thin and slightly stooped, wearing a faded gray field jacket over an old blue plaid shirt, dark worn work pants, and scuffed brown boots. His face was long and tired, pale with deep lines around the mouth, his sparse silver-gray hair tucked beneath a dark knit cap. He had faded blue eyes that moved too quickly. Not like a shopper looking for bread, but like a man counting exits. Caleb noticed the way he kept his left shoulder angled away from the security mirror. Former military, Caleb thought, or someone who had spent years running from military men. The old man walked down the aisle behind Caleb, slow enough to seem harmless, close enough to be heard. As he passed, he did not look at Caleb. His cracked lips barely moved. Ghost 6. The world narrowed to that name. The sound of the scanner vanished. The country music disappeared. Caleb's hand froze over the wallet in his palm. Ghost 6 was not a nickname. It was not something written in town gossip or old news clippings. It was a battlefield call sign from Operation Black Hollow, a name buried with the men who never came back. 6 men dead, 1 survivor. One story the military had repeated until repeating became truth. Caleb Mercer had broken position. Caleb Mercer's signal had compromised the team. Caleb Mercer had lived when better men died. He had denied it in every official room until the room stopped listening. After a while, he had stopped denying it out loud and started fighting the accusation inside his own skull, where it always won after midnight. Rook changed first. The Belgian Malinois did not bark. He went completely still. His ears sharpened forward, his tail lowered, and the muscles beneath his mahogany coat tightened. Caleb turned. The old man had reached the end of the aisle. For half a second, the man's eyes met Caleb's. They were not the eyes of a stranger. They were terrified, guilty, and full of recognition. Then he moved toward the exit. Caleb stepped after him, but Mabel's voice cut through the sudden pressure in his chest. Caleb? He did not answer. Rook pulled once at his side, not toward the door, but toward the front window. Caleb looked through the glass. Outside, the old man was already crossing the parking lot. Caleb took 1 step toward the exit, but Rook suddenly planted himself hard against Caleb's leg and let out a low warning growl, not at the old man, not at the door, but at the reflection in the market window. Caleb followed the dog's stare and saw, for one impossible second, a child-sized handprint on the inside of the glass where no child had been standing. It was made of pale dust, 5 small fingers spread wide, just like the mark Caleb sometimes saw in his dreams before waking with his heart pounding. When Caleb blinked, the handprint was still there. Mabel saw it too. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Rook pressed closer to the glass, nose working fast, and Caleb felt something colder than fear move through him. The dog was not reacting to a ghost. Rook was reacting to a memory that had somehow found its way into daylight. Caleb pushed through the door. The bell above it struck the frame hard. Cold air hit his face. The old man was gone. Not walking away, not climbing into a car, not disappearing around the corner. Gone. The parking lot held only a few vehicles. Mabel's aging sedan, a farm truck with feed bags in the back, Caleb's dark pickup, and an old beige truck parked near the far end beneath a dead maple tree. Rook pulled toward that truck with sudden force. Caleb followed, 1 hand lowered near the dog's vest, his body moving with old training before thought could interfere. The beige truck looked abandoned. Dust covered the windshield. The tires were muddy. The license plate was smeared almost clean of numbers. On the windshield, drawn in the dust from the outside, was another small handprint. Not real, Caleb told himself. Not possible. A child from Black Hollow would not still be a child. But the mark was not meant to be literal. It was a symbol, a message. Rook rose on his hind legs and pressed his front paws against the passenger door, nose pushed to the seam. His breathing grew sharp, urgent. Caleb looked through the window. The seat was empty, except for a small object placed deliberately in the center, where anyone looking would see it. A military bracelet. Caleb did not move for several seconds. His own reflection looked back at him from the glass, pale and rigid. the face of a man watching a grave open. He knew that bracelet. The woven black cord, the dull metal plate, the tiny scratch across the edge from a training accident in Coronado. It had belonged to Nolan Briggs, his closest friend, the man who used to smile before dangerous missions because he said fear hated being mocked. Nolan was supposed to have died in the first blast at Black Hollow. Caleb had seen his name on the casualty report. He had heard the flag folded over an empty coffin because there had not been enough left to send home. Caleb opened the truck door slowly. It was unlocked. That frightened him more than a locked door would have. The bracelet rested on the passenger seat beside a folded grocery receipt from Ash Creek Market. On the receipt, printed beneath the store name, someone had written in block letters, "Don't trust the hearing." Caleb stared at the words until they seemed to move. The hearing, tomorrow morning. The final military review that would decide whether the disgrace attached to his name would become permanent record, whether his benefits would be stripped, whether the world would remember him not as a soldier who failed, but as a soldier who betrayed. He had thought the hearing was an ending. Now someone was telling him it was a trap. Rook suddenly barked once, sharp and violent, toward the back seat. Caleb turned fast. Nothing. Empty vinyl. A torn blanket. A rusted toolbox. But Rook did not relax. He leaned in, sniffing the floor behind the passenger seat, then froze, his ears pinned forward. His body lowered into the posture Caleb knew too well from missions overseas. Not fear, not aggression, detection. Rook had found a trail. Caleb reached into the back and lifted the torn blanket. Beneath it, scratched into the dusty floor mat, were 3 letters, LBC. Caleb's throat tightened. He did not know why those letters hurt. He only knew they did. Somewhere deep in the locked rooms of his mind, a child sobbed. Nolan shouted his name, and Rook barked through smoke. Mabel had come outside, but stopped several yards away, wrapping her cardigan around herself, though the cold was not that bad. "Caleb," she said softly, "should I call the sheriff?" Caleb looked at the bracelet in his hand. His fingers had closed around it so tightly, the metal edge bit into his palm. He wanted to say no. He wanted to climb into his truck, drive home, lock the door, and tell himself this was someone's cruel game. But Rook was still staring into the beige truck, as if the past had left a scent there and dared him to follow. Caleb knew that look. Rook had worn it in ruined villages, in abandoned compounds, in the terrible seconds before an ambush. The dog did not understand paperwork, hearings, guilt, or politics. Rook understood danger. Rook understood the difference between a dead trail and a living one. Caleb looked back toward the market. "The man who came in," he said. "Did you know him?" Mabel shook her head, her face pale. "Never seen him before. But he was waiting." Caleb turned to her. "What do you mean?" "He didn't shop," she said. "He stood near the back for maybe 20 minutes. Kept watching the door, like he knew you were coming." Caleb felt the air thin around him. The old man had not found him by accident. The bracelet had not been left by accident. The handprint, the message, the truck, the timing, each piece had been placed in his path by someone who knew tomorrow's hearing mattered. Inside the store, Mabel pulled up the security footage with trembling fingers. Caleb stood behind her. Rook pressed against his leg. On the grainy screen, the old man entered at 2:14 p.m. Caleb did not arrive until 2:36. For 22 minutes, the man waited near the rear aisle, never picking up a single item. At 2:35, 1 minute before Caleb walked in, the old man looked directly into the camera and adjusted his collar. Caleb leaned closer. On the collar of the gray field jacket was a small, faded pin, almost hidden in the fabric. The symbol of a communications unit attached to Black Hollow, a unit that had supposedly lost all field records after the operation. Caleb's pulse sounded loud in his ears. Mabel whispered, "Do you know what that means?" Caleb did not answer at first. His eyes stayed on the frozen image of the old man's face. The man looked sick, scared, and desperate. Not like a threat, like someone trying to confess without living long enough to finish. Rook gave a low whine, the kind he only made when Caleb's nightmares were about to drag him under. Caleb looked down. The dog's amber eyes were fixed on him, steady and certain. For years, Caleb had believed the past was a sealed door. Now the door had opened by itself, and something on the other side had spoken his dead name. Caleb slipped Nolan's bracelet into his pocket and folded the receipt once, then again, until the warning disappeared inside his palm. Tomorrow, he was supposed to sit in a military hearing and let men with clean folders decide what kind of soldier he had been. Tonight, he had a different order to follow, one given by a frightened old man, a dead friend's bracelet, and a dog who had never once lied to him. As the security footage froze on the hidden communications pin, Caleb finally understood the message was not just a warning, it was an invitation back into the worst night of his life. And somewhere inside that night, a child's handprint was still waiting to be explained. Caleb Mercer did not sleep that night. He sat at the small kitchen table in his cabin with Nolan Briggs's bracelet lying beside the folded receipt. The words, "Don't trust the hearing," hidden inside the crease like a warning too dangerous to leave open. Outside, the woods around Ash Creek pressed close against the windows, black pine branches moving in the wind like hands testing the glass. Rook lay near the door, but he was not resting. The full-grown Belgian Malinois kept his head lifted, upright ears turning at every sound, his dark amber eyes fixed on the road beyond the porch. Caleb had seen that kind of watchfulness before, in the hours before raids, when Rook sensed something wrong before any radio confirmed it. Caleb should have called someone. He should have reported the beige truck, the old man, the security footage, the bracelet, but every official road led back to the same place now, the hearing, the final military review, the clean room where men with pressed uniforms and sealed files would decide whether the worst night of his life would become the only thing his name ever meant. Caleb lifted Nolan's bracelet and rubbed his thumb over the scratched metal plate. Nolan had been an American soldier in his mid-30s with a strong athletic build, a friendly rugged face, warm brown eyes, a square jaw, short dark blonde military-cut hair, light stubble, and the kind of loyal expression that made nervous men breathe easier before stepping into danger. Caleb remembered Nolan laughing in the rain before Black Hollow, saying, "If command ever gets us killed, haunt them politely first." Caleb had laughed then. Now the sound of that memory hurt more than silence. Before dawn, Caleb dressed exactly as the hearing notice required. A complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform, matching blouse and trousers, properly fitted and fully buttoned, plain black belt, plain black combat boots, no extras. He left off everything that might look defensive. No tactical vest, no body armor, no weapon, no gloves, no pack. His face in the bathroom mirror looked calm, composed, almost empty. Only his eyes gave him away. Cold blue-gray, sleepless, still searching for exits even in his own reflection. Rook rose as Caleb opened the drawer where he had placed the bracelet. The dog stepped forward and sniffed the metal once, then looked toward the front door. Not begging to come, not asking. Reporting readiness. Caleb clipped the leash onto Rook's simple working dog collar, adjusted the tan tactical K9 vest across the dog's lean mahogany shoulders, and whispered, "We go in quiet." Rook blinked once, steady and obedient. To anyone else, it was just a dog looking at his handler. To Caleb, it was the only answer he trusted. The drive to Fort Harrow took 2 hours through gray mountain roads and low fog. Fort Harrow had once been an active training post, but now it served as a review center, a place where old cases were reopened under fluorescent lights, and old soldiers were asked to explain moments that had lasted seconds but destroyed decades. Caleb's dark pickup passed empty fields, abandoned barns, and long stretches of pine forest. Every few miles, Rook stood in the passenger seat, nose lifting toward the vents, then settling again. Caleb tried to focus on the road, but his mind kept circling the same impossible facts. The old man had known Ghost 6. Nolan's bracelet had appeared in a stranger's truck. A child's handprint had been drawn in dust. And someone had warned him not to trust the hearing before the hearing had even begun. Caleb tightened his grip on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, for 1 long mile, he thought he saw a black sedan 2 bends behind him. It never came close enough to prove anything. It never fell far enough away to forget. Fort Harrow appeared through the fog like a memory built out of concrete. The gate was guarded by 2 military police officers in dark outer jackets, both young enough to have learned Caleb's story from files instead of people. The taller one, a clean-shaven man with stiff posture and cautious eyes, checked Caleb's identification and tried not to stare at Rook. "Proceed to Building C," he said. "Major Ross is expecting you." Caleb heard the name for the first time and filed it away. Expecting him. Everyone here was expecting him. That was the problem. The base road led past old barracks, a flagpole snapping in the wind, and a low brick building with narrow windows. Caleb parked beside 3 government vehicles and sat still for a moment. Rook's head turned toward Building C. His ears went forward. Caleb followed the dog's gaze and saw a man in a dark navy security-style jacket standing near the steps, talking to someone on the phone. The man had an athletic medium-tall build, a handsome but tense face, sharp cheekbones, short dark brown hair brushed neatly back, hazel eyes that kept avoiding the open lot, and light stubble that made him look more tired than careless. Derek Vance. Former teammate, former brother, now a man Caleb had not seen since the funerals. Derek ended the call as Caleb approached. His polite smile arrived half a second late. "Caleb," he said, voice smooth but too controlled. "Didn't know they were letting you bring the dog." Rook stepped slightly ahead, not lunging, not barking, but placing his body between Caleb and Derek's outstretched hand. Derek looked down at him and gave a small laugh that had no warmth in it. "Still remembers the old days, huh?" Caleb looked at Derek's hand, then at his face. "He remembers what matters." Something flickered in Derek's eyes. Annoyance, maybe. Fear, maybe. Then it was gone. "Today doesn't have to be ugly," Derek said. "Just answer what they ask. Let the record close." Caleb felt Nolan's bracelet heavy in his pocket. "Funny thing about records," he said. "They only close clean when no one opens the drawer underneath." Derek's smile thinned, but before he could answer, the building door opened. Major Evelyn Ross stepped outside with a folder tucked under one arm. She was an American woman in her mid-40s, with a lean professional build, a sharp intelligent face, pale skin, focused gray eyes, and straight dark brown shoulder-length hair tucked neatly behind her ears. She wore a neatly pressed dark olive military legal service uniform with a structured jacket, matching trousers, a light khaki inner shirt, a plain black belt, and polished black service boots. Her expression was calm, but not soft. She looked like someone who had spent years reading lies written in official language. "Chief Mercer," she said, using the old title without warmth or judgment. "Major Evelyn Ross. I will oversee procedural review." Caleb nodded. "Major." Her eyes moved to Rook, not with fear, but with attention. "Your K9 is cleared to enter under supervision. If he becomes disruptive, Colonel Pike will request removal." "Rook doesn't disrupt," Caleb said. "He warns." Ross held his gaze for a moment. "Then I suggest we all pay attention." Inside, the hearing room was colder than the hallway. A long table stood in the center, with folders stacked in careful lines. At the far end sat Colonel Warren Pike, an American man in his late 50s with a tall, rigid build, a square, weathered face, stern, deep-set brown eyes, short steel gray hair cut close, clean-shaven skin, and an expression hardened by decades of choosing order over doubt. He wore a formal olive military service uniform with a sharply fitted jacket, matching trousers, a dark tie, black belt, and polished black service shoes. Minimal insignia. No unnecessary decorations. He did not need decoration to remind people he expected obedience. Beside him sat 2 review officers and a young stenographer. Derek took a seat near the side wall, close enough to listen, far enough to pretend neutrality. Caleb noticed that Derek placed his right hand flat over his jacket pocket as he sat down. Rook noticed too. Pike opened the session without greeting. "This hearing concerns the final review of Operation Black Hollow and the conduct of former Chief Petty Officer Caleb Mercer, call sign Ghost 6. The name struck the room like a match. Caleb did not move. Pike continued, reading from the file. "Existing findings indicate unauthorized movement from a signed observation point, compromised signal transmission, and subsequent enemy engagement, resulting in the deaths of 6 U.S. personnel and the disappearance of an unidentified local asset." Major Ross looked up sharply at that last phrase. Caleb looked at her. Unidentified local asset. That phrase had not appeared in the summary sent to him. Pike seemed to realize what he had read and closed the file slightly. "Correction. Disputed notation. Not relevant to today's purpose." Ross's voice cut in. "If it is in the file, Colonel, it is relevant enough to identify." Pike's jaw tightened. "We will proceed in order, Major." As the first audio file began to play, Rook rose from the floor before any human voice came through the speakers. The room heard only static, a dry hiss like wind over gravel, but the dog's body changed completely. His ears pinned forward, his back straightened, and a low sound built in his throat, not a growl, not a bark, but a mournful, restrained whine that made Caleb's chest tighten. Rook walked to the speaker and sat in front of it the way he used to sit beside hidden survivors during search operations. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face because he knew that posture. Rook was not reacting to danger. He was marking life. Major Ross leaned toward the audio technician and said quietly, "Isolate the low band beneath the static." Pike started to object, but Rook lifted one paw and touched the table leg beneath the speaker, almost gently, as if pointing to a voice buried under the noise. When the technician adjusted the frequency, a child's whisper slipped into the room so faintly that everyone stopped breathing to hear it. "Please, don't let them take me." The stenographer's fingers froze above the keys. One of the review officers looked away first. Derek's face had lost color, though he tried to hide it by lowering his eyes to his notes. Caleb stood perfectly still, but inside him something cracked open. A room. Smoke. A small hand gripping cloth. Rook standing between a doorway and fire. The whisper did not sound new. It sounded like something Caleb had been hearing in dreams for years, only now the whole room had heard it with him. Pike reached toward the recorder. This could be contamination from civilian channels. Ross turned to him. "A child's voice appears in the final transmission of an operation that officially contained no child. We will not dismiss it without analysis." Pike's voice hardened. "Major, this is not an investigation into folklore, trauma memory, or canine behavior." Ross looked at Rook, then back at the colonel. "No, it is an investigation into a file that may have been incomplete." Caleb finally spoke. "Play it again." Pike looked at him, as if he had forgotten Caleb was allowed to speak. "That will not be necessary." "Play it again," Caleb repeated, quieter this time, which somehow made it heavier. Ross nodded to the technician. The static returned. Rook stepped back, then moved toward the evidence table where several sealed bags lay under labels: damaged radio casing, fabric fragment, cracked helmet camera, signal battery, field map. The dog ignored most of them. Then he stopped before a small plastic bag holding a faded blue cloth. He sniffed once, and his entire body went still. Caleb felt a pulse of pain behind his eyes. The cloth was soft, pale blue, frayed at one corner, too small to be a military bandage. Rook took the edge of the bag carefully between his teeth, not tearing it, not damaging it, and placed it on the floor beneath the speaker. Ross crouched and studied the label, filed as wound dressing recovered from Mercer's kit. She turned the bag slightly. On the fabric's corner, barely visible, was a small white embroidered letter. L. Caleb heard himself breathe. He did not remember the cloth, but his hands did. They curled slightly, as though they had once held it. Derek stood up too quickly. "With respect, Major, we're turning a military review into a ghost story because a dog likes a piece of fabric." Rook's head snapped toward him. Not aggressive, exact. Derek stopped talking. Caleb watched him closely. "You're nervous," Caleb said. Derek's jaw tightened. "I'm tired of watching you drag dead men through the mud to save yourself." Caleb took one step toward him, and Pike slammed a palm on the table. "Enough." Ross stood. "Sit down, Mr. Vance." Derek hesitated, then sat. For the next hour, the room became a battlefield of paper. Pike laid out the old findings. Caleb's signal device had transmitted coordinates that led the team into exposure. His helmet camera went black 6 minutes before the ambush. His after-action statements were fragmented and contradictory. No verified civilian child appeared in any official body count, extraction log, or medical intake. Each sentence sounded clean. Each sentence had the cold perfection of something written after the blood was gone. Caleb listened, but the child's whisper kept repeating beneath every word. "Please don't let them take me." He tried to reach for the memory and found only smoke. That was the cruelty of it. He could feel the truth like a shape behind a curtain, but every time he pulled, the curtain tore instead of opening. Ross asked to enter a procedural hold pending audio review. Pike refused immediate suspension but allowed the session to continue under expanded questioning. It was not victory, but it was a crack. Caleb could see it even in Pike's face. The colonel still believed in the file, but he had heard the voice too. Everyone had. As the hearing adjourned for a short recess, Rook returned to Caleb's side and pressed his shoulder against his leg. Caleb lowered one hand to the dog's head. "What did I forget, boy?" he whispered. Rook looked up at him with steady amber eyes, then glanced toward the evidence table, toward the blue cloth, toward Derek Vance sitting alone with both hands clenched around his knees. When the door opened for recess, Caleb looked back at the room one last time. Major Ross had taken possession of the audio copy and the cloth evidence. Colonel Pike was speaking quietly to one of the review officers, his stern face darker than before. Derek stood near the wall, pretending to check his phone, but Caleb noticed his hand trembling. The hearing had been designed to close Black Hollow forever. Instead, it had produced a child's voice, a hidden notation, and a dog who had just identified the first thing in the room that did not belong to the official story. Caleb stepped into the hallway, with Rook beside him, Nolan's bracelet in his pocket, and the whisper still inside his skull. For the first time in years, he was no longer afraid that he had imagined the child. He was afraid because she had been real. The recess did not feel like a break. It felt like the room had exhaled something dangerous, and everyone was pretending not to smell it. Caleb Mercer stood in the hallway outside the hearing chamber with Rook pressed close to his left leg. The Belgian Malinois calm in posture but alive with tension beneath the tan tactical vest. Soldiers, clerks, and officers passed at both ends of the corridor, but their voices lowered when they saw him. Caleb knew that look. He had carried it for years. The look people gave a man after reading a file but before hearing his voice. The hallway at Fort Harrow was narrow, painted in a tired shade of institutional beige, with framed photographs of clean ceremonies and smiling units on the walls. Caleb hated those photographs. Not because the men in them were false, but because photographs never showed what happened after the ceremony ended. They never showed the night sweats, the empty chairs, the names spoken only in courtrooms, or the way a man could live long enough to become the villain of his own survival. Major Evelyn Ross stepped out of the hearing room carrying a sealed evidence folder under one arm and a legal pad marked with sharp, controlled handwriting. She looked composed, but Caleb had learned to notice the smallest fractures in people trained not to show them. Her jaw was tighter than before. Her gray eyes moved from Caleb to Rook, then back to the closed door. "Colonel Pike has agreed to call medical records into review," she said. "Not because he wants to, because the official timeline no longer explains itself cleanly." Caleb gave a humorless breath. Files rarely explain themselves. People explain them after deciding what they want the dead to say. Ross did not disagree. "Then let's ask the living who signed the papers." The man they brought in 20 minutes later looked like someone who had been aging under a weight he never put down. Dr. Samuel Keene was an American man in his early to mid-60s, with an average build, a tired, thoughtful face, soft-lined features, light blue eyes behind thin rectangular glasses, thinning silver hair combed neatly across the top, and no beard. He wore a muted brown tweed jacket over a pale blue button-up shirt, charcoal trousers, a dark leather belt, and simple dark loafers, carrying a worn leather satchel that looked older than some of the officers in the room. He did not walk like a man afraid of soldiers. He walked like a man afraid of memory. When his eyes found Caleb, his face tightened with recognition and shame. Caleb remembered him only in pieces. A bright medical lamp, cold fingers checking his pupils, a voice telling him to stop fighting, someone saying he was confused. Keene had been a military doctor attached to the post-treatment unit after Black Hollow. His signature appeared on Caleb's recovery file, the same file that had made Caleb sound unstable, unreliable, and nearly incoherent. Colonel Warren Pike called the room back to order with visible impatience. Derek Vance sat near the wall again, composed on the surface, his dark navy security-style jacket zipped halfway, hands folded carefully, hazel eyes lowered whenever Caleb looked his way. Rook noticed him, but did not move. The dog's attention had shifted to Dr. Keene, not hostile, not accusing, watchful, as if Rook understood this man carried a scent not of danger, but of withheld truth. Major Ross began gently, which somehow made the questions sharper. "Dr. Keene, you treated Chief Mercer after Operation Black Hollow?" Keene adjusted his glasses with a hand that trembled slightly. "I was part of the receiving medical team, yes." "Was he conscious?" "Intermittently." "Coherent?" Keene swallowed. "At times." Pike leaned back as if already bored. Ross continued. "The official file states that Mercer repeatedly referenced signal failure and personal disorientation. Is that accurate?" Keene looked down at his satchel. The silence lasted too long. Caleb felt the old anger begin beneath his ribs. Not hot yet, but waking. "Doctor," Ross said, "is that accurate?" Keene's voice came quieter. "Not exactly." The room shifted. Pike sat forward. "Clarify." Keene took out a folded copy of an old intake sheet, the paper worn thin from years of being hidden, handled, perhaps regretted over and over again. The final typed report says he repeated the phrase, "the signal." That is what went into the review file. Ross's eyes narrowed. And what did he actually say? Keene did not look at Caleb. He said, "the girl." A sound moved through the room, not loud enough to be called a gasp, but enough to mark the moment. Caleb did not move. For years, he had been told his memory was broken, his statements confused, his guilt disguised as trauma. Now one changed word stood between him and the life they had taken from him. The signal sounded like a failed soldier. The girl sounded like a missing soul. Caleb's hand tightened against his thigh. Rook stepped closer, his shoulder touching Caleb's boot, grounding him before the room could tilt. "You changed it," Caleb said. Keene closed his eyes briefly. "I signed the final copy. That's not what I asked." Keene finally looked at him. His face had the helpless sorrow of a man who knew honesty had arrived too late to be mercy. "Yes, I let it be changed." Caleb stepped toward him before Ross could stop him, not fast enough to threaten, but close enough for Keene to flinch. Rook moved with Caleb, silent and controlled, then suddenly did something no one expected. He left Caleb's side, walked to Dr. Keene's satchel, and lowered his nose to the old leather. The dog sniffed once, twice, then sat down in front of it and looked up at the doctor with an expression so steady it seemed almost human. Keene's face drained of color. "No," he whispered. "That isn't possible." Ross turned sharply. "What isn't possible?" Keene's hand hovered over the satchel but did not touch it. "I never brought it out. Not once." His voice broke. He remembers the smell. Caleb felt the room go cold around him. "What smell?" Keene opened the satchel with trembling fingers and pulled out a small sealed vial wrapped in gauze. Its label faded but still readable. It was not evidence from the hearing. It was something Keene had carried privately for years. "The sedative used on you after extraction," he said. "I kept one sample because the dosage order was wrong. Too high for stabilization. High enough to blur recall." Rook gave one low whine, and Caleb understood with a sick, sinking clarity. The holes in his memory had not all been made by war. Keene laid the vial on the table as if it might explode. Ross immediately signaled the stenographer to mark it as newly disclosed material. Pike's face hardened. "Doctor, you are suggesting improper medical handling based on a vial you concealed for years?" Keene's shame turned into something almost like defiance, weak but real. "I am not suggesting. I am stating that Chief Mercer was administered a high dose after he began repeating statements that did not match the operational report." Caleb heard his own pulse. "Who ordered it?" Keene's eyes flicked toward Pike, then Ross, then the floor. Ross's voice was quiet. "Doctor." Keene reached back into the satchel and produced a carbon copy authorization slip, creased along the edges. It was not ordered by the attending physician. He placed it beside the vial. It came through command authority. Pike's mouth tightened. "Name." Keene looked at Caleb now, and there was apology in the way he failed to hold the gaze. "Adrian Cross." The name did not strike Caleb like a shock. It landed heavier, like a door closing somewhere deep underground. General Adrian Cross had been a decorated commander even then, a man whose public face was all discipline and sacrifice. Caleb remembered him vaguely from briefings. Pale, weathered skin, piercing gray eyes, white hair perfectly kept, a voice that made orders sound like moral law. Cross had stood at memorials, written letters to families, and told grieving mothers their sons had died with honor. He had also signed the order that helped bury Caleb's memory. Caleb wanted rage to come cleanly, but what rose first was grief. If Cross had ordered the sedative, then someone above the chaos had been listening. Someone had known Caleb was speaking about a girl. Someone had decided that forgetting her mattered more than saving him. Derek Vance shifted in his chair. It was a small movement, but Rook's head turned instantly. Derek stopped. Ross noticed. Caleb noticed. Pike pretended not to. "Dr. Keene," Ross said, "why keep the sample and the authorization if you intended to remain silent?" Keene's hands folded together on the table. "Because cowardice is not the same as peace. I told myself I was preserving the truth in case it was ever needed. In reality, I was preserving proof that I had failed to use it." His voice thinned. "I had a wife with cancer then, 2 children in college. Cross had influence over my posting, my pension, everything. I told myself Mercer was already lost, and that one doctor could not fight command." Caleb stared at him. "You were wrong." Keene nodded. "Yes. Your wrong cost me years." Keene's eyes filled but did not spill. "Yes." Caleb wanted to hate him. It would have been easier. But looking at the old man's bent shoulders and ruined face, he saw not a monster, but something almost worse. A decent man who had chosen fear at the exact moment courage was needed. Ross requested immediate preservation of the vial, authorization slip, and original intake note. Pike resisted on procedural grounds, arguing that private materials could not be admitted without chain verification. Ross did not raise her voice. "Then verify them, but do not pretend they do not exist." Pike looked at the table, at the old paper, at Caleb, at the dog sitting motionless beside the chair. For the first time, the colonel seemed less angry than cornered by the rules he worshipped. "Temporary admission for review," he said at last. "No conclusions." Ross nodded. "No conclusions, only facts." Caleb almost laughed. Facts had been there all along, apparently, folded in a satchel, hidden beneath a doctor's gilt, waiting for a dog to smell what men had buried. The questioning continued, but Caleb heard it from far away. Keene explained that Caleb had arrived with a concussion, blood loss, and stress response. He had been restrained briefly because he kept trying to stand, repeating that someone had been taken. He had not accused a teammate clearly. He had not described the full scene. He had simply repeated enough fragments to become dangerous to whoever needed a clean narrative. The sedative had not erased his memory like magic. It had blurred the first hours, weakened recall, and allowed later reports to shape what others believed he had said. That mattered. It made the story more cruel because it meant Caleb's mind had not invented everything. It had been wounded, then handled by people who needed him uncertain. When the session broke again, Keene stood slowly, as if every bone had aged during testimony. Caleb intercepted him near the door. Rook stayed beside Caleb, calm now. "Why today?" Caleb asked. Keene looked past him at the hallway, where young officers moved without knowing they were walking through the ruins of old choices. "Because when Major Ross called, I thought of your face on that table," he said. "You kept trying to lift your hand. You were too weak. I thought you were reaching for a weapon we had already removed." He swallowed hard. "Years later I understood. You were reaching for the dog." Caleb looked down at Rook. The Belgian Malinois looked back, steady as stone. Keene added, "And I thought if that animal is still alive, maybe God left one witness no one could promote, threaten, or shame into silence." Caleb said nothing for a long moment. Then he moved aside. Keene walked out carrying less than he had carried in. Inside the hearing room, Ross placed the new evidence into sealed custody bags. Derek remained seated, face pale, jaw tight, one hand pressed against the pocket of his jacket as though holding something in place. Caleb saw it clearly now. This was not just a file with errors. It was a machine built out of fear, command, silence, and altered words. One word had turned a child into a signal. One injection had turned a witness into a confused survivor. One signature had turned Caleb's broken memory into someone else's shield. As the door closed behind Dr. Keene, Caleb reached into his pocket and touched Nolan's bracelet. He did not remember everything yet, but for the first time, the missing pieces had edges, and one of those edges carried the name Adrian Cross. By the time Caleb Mercer left Fort Harrow, the sky had turned the color of wet steel. The hearing had not ended. It had cracked. Behind him, Major Evelyn Ross had stayed to secure Dr. Samuel Keene's documents, the old sedative vial, and the medical note that had changed one word and ruined a life. Caleb should have felt relief. Instead, he felt exposed. The name Adrian Cross had followed him out of the hearing room like a second shadow, heavier than the cold, heavier than the silence in his truck. Rook climbed into the passenger seat without command, his tan tactical K9 vest brushing against the console, his black masked face turned toward the base entrance. The Belgian Malinois did not relax until the gate disappeared behind them. Caleb drove without turning on the radio. Static had become too alive now. Every hiss in the speakers might have carried a child's breath, a dying man's warning, or a truth some officer had buried under a cleaner phrase. He kept one hand on the wheel and one hand close to the pocket that held Nolan Briggs's bracelet. The metal edge pressed through the fabric against his thigh like a pulse. Nolan had once told him that dead men were only silent when the living refused to listen. At the time, Caleb had thought it was another one of Nolan's half-jokes. Now it felt like an accusation. Major Ross called before Caleb reached Ash Creek. Her voice came through the truck speaker controlled, but the fatigue beneath it was real. "I traced the insignia from the market footage," she said. The old man was attached to a communications relay unit near Black Hollow. Name, Raymond Sutter. Went by Ray. Discharged quietly 11 months after the operation. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "Where is he?" "A rented room outside Millstone Ridge. No active phone. No current bank activity except small veteran assistance deposits. He has moved 4 times in 6 years. Running from someone?" Caleb asked. Ross paused. "Or hiding from what he knows." Rook lifted his head at her voice and stared through the windshield, ears forward. Caleb saw the road bend into pine forest, gray fog pooling between the trees. "Send the address." "Caleb," Ross said, and this time her tone sharpened. "Do not go alone." He looked at Rook. "I'm not," Ross exhaled. "That is not what I mean. I know." He ended the call before she could argue, but 5 minutes later his phone vibrated with the address and a short message. "I am 30 minutes behind you. Do not force entry. Preserve anything he gives you." Caleb almost smiled. Major Ross had the rare talent of giving orders like warnings and warnings like evidence. Millstone Ridge was the kind of place people passed without noticing. A cluster of low rental cabins sat beside an abandoned service road, half hidden by winter bare shrubs and old utility poles. The nearest town had moved on without it. Caleb parked near the last cabin, a narrow single-story structure with peeling white paint, drawn curtains, and a porch light burning in daylight. A rusted wind chime hung from the roof beam but did not move, though the air was cold enough to bite. Rook stepped down first, his body low, controlled, assessing. The dog sniffed the gravel, then the porch steps, then stopped before the door. Not danger, recognition. Caleb felt it in the way Rook's tail went still. There were old smells here. Sweat, medicine, dust, fear, and something metallic beneath them. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. From inside came the click of something being lifted and set down, then a hoarse voice. "Go away." Caleb did not raise his voice. "Raymond Sutter." Silence. "You called me Ghost 6. The floor creaked inside. A thin line of shadow broke the curtain beside the door. "I didn't call anyone," the voice said. Caleb looked at Rook. The Malinois stepped closer to the door and gave one soft scratch with his paw. Not urgent, not aggressive, almost gentle. On the other side, the old man made a sound that was not quite a sob. Locks turned slowly. The door opened the width of a chain. Raymond Ray Sutter looked smaller in person than he had on the market footage. He was an elderly American man around 70, thin and slightly stooped, with a long, tired face, pale skin stretched over sharp cheekbones, faded blue eyes red-rimmed from poor sleep, sparse silver-gray hair under a dark knit cap, and rough stubble along his jaw. He wore the same faded gray field jacket over an old blue plaid shirt, dark worn work pants, and scuffed brown boots. He smelled faintly of menthol, cold coffee, and sickness. But what Caleb noticed most was the way Ray's eyes went first to Rook, not to Caleb's uniform, not to his face, to the dog. Ray's lips trembled. "He's alive," he whispered. Rook sat down on the porch, steady and silent. Ray pressed one hand to the doorframe as if his legs had weakened. "I heard him that night," Ray said. "Through the static, through everything. He wouldn't stop barking." Caleb's throat tightened. "Open the door." Ray's fear returned. His eyes flicked past Caleb toward the road, the trees, the empty cabins. They watch roads. They watch mailboxes. They watch old men who should have died before growing guilty. "Who?" Caleb asked. Ray shook his head. "Not on the porch." He closed the door, slid the chain free, and let them in. The cabin's interior was cramped and dim, crowded with old radio parts, medicine bottles, folded maps, and yellowed newspapers stacked in careful, nervous piles. A short-wave radio sat on a small table beside the bed, its dials marked with tape. Above it hung a photograph of a much younger Ray in uniform, standing beside a communications truck. In the photo, he had been broad-shouldered, alert, almost proud. The man in the room was what fear had done to that pride. Ray shut the curtains before speaking again. "I wasn't in Black Hollow proper," he said. "Relay post. Northridge. We weren't supposed to hear everything. Just enough to pass clean traffic up command chain." Caleb stood near the door, Rook at his side. "But you heard something else." Ray nodded, then pressed a hand against his chest as if steadying his breath. "A broken channel. Emergency bounce. Someone using damaged field equipment, not the primary net." "Nolan," Caleb said. Ray closed his eyes. Yes, the name felt different in the little room. Not like a casualty line, like a man stepping back through the door. Ray moved to the radio table and opened a drawer with both hands. Inside were dozens of cassette tapes labeled in shaking handwriting, but before he touched any of them, Rook rose and walked to the corner near the bed. The dog lowered his nose to a loose floorboard and began to breathe in short, focused bursts. Ray froze. "No," he whispered. Caleb watched Rook hook one claw into the gap and lift. Beneath the board was a small cloth bundle wrapped in plastic. Ray backed away as if the floor itself had accused him. Caleb picked it up and unwrapped it. Inside was a child's blue hair ribbon, stiff with age, tied around a tiny wooden cross no bigger than Caleb's thumb. Ray covered his mouth with a shaking hand. "She kept dropping those," he said. "Little marks. Like breadcrumbs. She thought if she left enough of them, someone good would find the way back." Caleb stared at the ribbon, and a memory struck him so hard the room tilted. A small hand pushing something into Rook's vest, a whisper behind smoke, a child saying, "So he remembers me." Rook did not bark. He simply sat beside Caleb and leaned his shoulder against his leg, holding him upright without anyone else noticing. Ray sank into a chair. "I should have gone in," he said. "When I heard Nolan, I should have broken protocol, called outside command, screamed until someone listened. But I was a relay operator with a headset and a superior standing behind me telling me to log only cleared traffic." Caleb held the ribbon carefully. "Who was your superior?" Ray's jaw tightened. "Captain Elias Morrow. He disappeared 3 weeks later. Officially transferred. Unofficially, no one heard from him again." Caleb stored the name. Ray pointed toward the tapes. Nolan's transmission came in pieces. First he said the extraction point had been changed. Then he said you were down, but not dead. Then he said there was a girl. He kept saying, "Do not let Cross take the girl." Ray's voice thinned around the name. I copied what I could. I made a backup because something in his voice told me the official log was already lost. Caleb wanted to ask everything at once. Where was the girl? Who took her? Why had Nolan's message never reached anyone? But Ray looked as if too many questions might break him before he reached the truth. Caleb forced his voice low. "Why come to me now?" Ray looked toward the covered window. "Because the hearing notice was flagged through an old veteran administration system. I saw your name in a records request. Somebody was making sure the final review stayed quiet. That meant they were going to finish it." "They?" "The men who turned a rescue into a report." Ray's eyes found Caleb's. "I waited too long. I know that. I became the kind of coward who keeps evidence in drawers and calls it conscience. But when I saw your name, I thought of Nolan begging through static. And I thought of that dog." He looked down at Rook. That dog did not sound like an animal that night. He sounded like a soldier refusing to abandon someone. The front window flashed with passing headlights. Rook stood instantly, body between Caleb and the glass. Ray went pale. "Down," Caleb whispered. Not to Rook, but to the room, to the old fear rising. He moved one finger to part the curtain. A black sedan rolled past the cabin slowly, too slowly for an empty service road. No license plate light, no turn signal. It continued around the bend and disappeared behind the trees. Ray began shaking so badly the chair creaked beneath him. "You see?" he whispered. "You see why I waited in public? Why I didn't come to your cabin? They don't need to kill you fast. They just need to know who is talking." Caleb let the curtain fall. "Then talk while you can." Ray took a cassette from the drawer. Its label had nearly faded, but 2 words remained: Ridge Bounce. He placed it into an old player with careful hands. For a moment there was only mechanical hiss, then static, then distant shouting swallowed by interference. Caleb closed his eyes without meaning to. He smelled smoke where there was none. Rook pressed against his knee. Through the noise came Nolan Briggs's voice, broken, breathless, alive in the most painful way. "This is Briggs. Relay unknown. Mercer did not compromise. Repeat, Mercer did not." Static consumed the sentence. Ray adjusted the dial. Nolan returned, weaker. "There's a child. They changed the route. Cross wants her contained." Caleb tried to stop it. "If anyone hears this, church site, old mission chapel, find what she left." The tape warped, slowed, then steadied for one final line. "Tell Ghost 6. The quiet soldier kept his promise as long as he could. Caleb could not move. The room blurred at the edges. Quiet soldier. The phrase did not belong to Nolan. It belonged to a child. A child who had named him not by rank, not by call sign, but by the one thing she had seen in him through fire and fear. Ray stopped the tape before it could spool empty. "That is all I have clear," he said. "There are fragments, but most are gone." Caleb opened his eyes. "Why the handprint?" Ray reached into a cigar box on the table and pulled out a small card covered with dust-white marks. "The girl used them. Not real handprints all the time. Sometimes chalk, sometimes ash. She was told to stay hidden and mark where she moved if she had to run. Nolan said she was smart, too smart for a child who had already seen too much." He handed Caleb the card. "I used the mark but he would." Ray nodded toward Rook. "He would remember what the rest of you were forced to forget." A knock sounded at the door. Ray jerked so violently the cassette player rattled. Rook stepped forward, but Caleb heard the pattern: 2 firm knocks, a pause, then one. Controlled, not hostile. "Major Ross." A woman's voice called through the door. "Caleb, I told you not to go alone." Caleb opened the door. Ross stood on the porch, coat damp from fog, her folder tucked beneath her arm, eyes moving quickly from Caleb to Ray to the old radio equipment. She did not waste time on reprimand. "Is that the tape?" Ray nodded. Ross's face changed just enough to show she understood its weight. "Then we secure it now." Caleb handed her the cassette, but kept the blue ribbon and wooden cross wrapped in his palm. Ross saw them, but did not ask yet. Good investigators knew when a man was holding evidence, and when he was holding the only piece of a memory he could bear. Ray looked exhausted, emptied by confession. "There's more at the chapel," he said. "Nolan said she left something where the floor sounds hollow." Ross wrote that down. Caleb looked toward Rook. The dog stood facing the door, alert but not afraid, as if the road ahead had finally become visible to him. Outside, the fog thickened around the cabins, hiding the bend where the black sedan had vanished. Inside, for the first time, Caleb held proof that Nolan had spoken after the world said he was gone. The past was no longer just a nightmare, a file, or a damaged memory. It had a voice, it had a ribbon, it had a direction, and it was pointing toward the place where a frightened child had once tried to leave a trail home. The old mission chapel did not appear on the official Black Hollow maps. Major Evelyn Ross confirmed that twice before they left Ray Sutter's cabin, once through the restricted archive copy she carried on her secure tablet, and once through the printed operational map preserved in Caleb Mercer's case file. Both maps showed a training boundary, a ridgeline, a dry creek bed, and a marked extraction corridor that had supposedly failed because Caleb's signal went wrong. Neither showed a chapel. That should have made Caleb feel certain that they were moving towards something real. Instead, it made the unease worse. A place could disappear from a map by accident. But a building with a steeple, stone walls, and a road leading to it did not disappear from every military record unless someone needed it gone. Ross insisted on bringing one more investigator before they went. His name was Mason Holt, a former Army intelligence analyst now attached to Internal Review. An American man in his late 20s to early 30s with a fit, practical build, light tan skin, an open but serious face, alert green-brown eyes, short sandy brown hair, and a clean-shaven jaw that made him look younger than his voice. He wore an olive field jacket over a gray Henley shirt, dark blue jeans, a black belt, and tan work boots, carrying a small notebook in the left chest pocket. Mason was polite, observant, and careful with his words, but Caleb could see the doubt in him. Mason had grown up in the version of the military where files were sacred, and men like Caleb were cautionary stories. He did not look at Caleb with hatred. That would have been easier. He looked at him like a man trying not to believe too quickly. They drove in two vehicles through the back roads beyond Millstone Ridge. Ross rode with Mason in a government SUV, while Caleb followed in his pickup with Rook in the passenger seat. The Belgian Malinois did not sleep. He stood braced with his front paws steady on the floorboard, his dark amber eyes fixed ahead, tan tactical vest snug across his lean muscular shoulders. The road narrowed until asphalt gave way to cracked concrete, then to packed dirt. Pines leaned close over the track, their branches knitting together into a dim green tunnel. The farther they went, the quieter Caleb became. He did not remember this road, but his body did. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel at turns he had no reason to recognize. His left shoulder ached when the trees opened briefly to a slope of dead grass. His breathing changed when a broken utility pole came into view, leaning at an angle like a soldier who had taken one final step and stopped. Rook noticed every change. When Caleb's breath caught, the dog nudged his elbow once, firm and wordless. Caleb swallowed hard. "I know," he said, but he did not know. That was the worst part. He knew the fear without knowing the memory that owned it. The chapel stood half hidden in a hollow below the ridge, smaller than Caleb expected and older than the surrounding military roads. Its white paint had peeled away in long strips, exposing gray wood beneath. The roof sagged near the rear. One side window was broken inward, jagged glass still clinging to the frame. A crooked wooden cross remained above the entrance, darkened by weather. No sign marked the building. No fence protected it. The place looked abandoned by law, by faith, and by history. Ross stepped out first, scanning the structure with the calm precision of someone refusing to be impressed by atmosphere. Mason followed, notebook in hand, though his eyes lingered on the missing windows. Caleb opened the passenger door. Rook jumped down and immediately froze. His ears rose, his nose lifted. Then he turned his head toward the chapel door with such solemn focus that even Mason stopped writing. "Is that normal for him?" Mason asked. Caleb kept his eyes on the dog. "Normal when he recognizes a place." Mason's brow tightened. "You said you don't remember being here." Caleb looked at the chapel. The words came out rougher than he intended. "I said I don't remember all of it." Inside, the chapel smelled of old dust, damp wood, mouse nests, and something faintly metallic beneath the rot. The pews were narrow and warped, several overturned, others pushed aside as if people had once moved through in a hurry. The altar was little more than a raised wooden platform beneath a cracked wall where a faded painting had been removed long ago, leaving a pale rectangle like a missing face. Sunlight cut through the broken windows in thin shafts, revealing dust moving through the air like ash. Caleb took 3 steps in and stopped. His hand went to the back of the nearest pew. The wood was cold. A sound rose in his head, not from the room, not exactly, but from somewhere behind his eyes. A child breathing too fast. Nolan Briggs whispering, "Stay low." Rook's claws on wood. Caleb blinked, and the present returned in fragments. Ross near the center aisle, Mason photographing the floor, Rook walking slowly toward the raised platform. "Caleb?" Ross asked. He forced himself to answer. "Keep going." Rook reached the altar steps and suddenly lay flat, not in submission but in the low protective posture he used around wounded survivors. His muzzle pointed beneath the first step. Then, Very gently, he placed one paw on the dusty floorboards and looked back at Caleb. The gesture was so small that it should not have shaken anyone. But it did. Caleb saw, for an instant, not the chapel as it stood now, but the same boards lit by firelight and smoke. A little girl was crouched under the altar, one hand pressed over her mouth, the other clutching a strip of blue fabric. Caleb heard his own voice, younger and strained, saying, "Stay behind the dog. He'll take you home." The memory vanished before he could see her face. Caleb staggered a half-step. Mason moved as if to steady him, then stopped, unsure whether touching him would help or insult him. Ross noticed the moment and said softly, "What did you remember?" Caleb stared at Rook, who had not moved from the protective posture. "I promised her something," he said. "I don't know her name, but I promised." Ross crouched beside the step without touching anything. "Mason, photograph before disturbance." Mason obeyed quickly, moving around the platform with more care now, the skepticism in his face replaced by something quieter. He took pictures of the step, the paw mark in the dust, the nail pattern in the old wood. Then Ross nodded to Caleb. Caleb knelt, slid his fingers along the edge of the step, and found a gap. The wood lifted with a soft groan. Beneath it was a shallow cavity, lined with torn plastic sheeting. Inside sat a small rusted tin box wrapped in oilcloth. No one spoke. Caleb lifted it out like it might contain a beating heart. Rook rose and sat beside him, alert but still, as if guarding the moment itself. Ross opened the box carefully with gloved hands. The first item inside was a burned metal tag, half blackened but still readable at the edge. Briggs. Caleb's jaw tightened. The second was a folded sheet of paper brittle with age. The third was a child's drawing made in faded colored pencil. Mason inhaled sharply when Ross unfolded it. The drawing showed a tall man in a green uniform standing beside a brown dog with black around its face. The man's face was unfinished, just a blank oval, but the dog's ears were pointed high and protective. Behind them was a small figure drawn in blue, standing very close to the dog. At the bottom, in uneven child letters, were the words, "The quiet soldier promised." Caleb could not breathe for a second. He remembered being called many things: traitor, survivor, ghost six, compromised asset, failed operator. But quiet soldier belonged to the child. It had survived where his own memory had not. Mason looked at Caleb differently now. Not fully convinced, not yet, but disturbed by the shape of what he was seeing. "This was hidden before the building was abandoned," he said. "Not recently. The dust pattern, the corrosion, the oilcloth, it's old." Ross gave a small nod. "Document that." She unfolded the brittle paper. It was not a letter. It was a list. Names, initials, and short notations in block handwriting. Some names Caleb recognized from Black Hollow support units. Others meant nothing to him. One line stopped Ross cold. She turned the paper slightly so Caleb could see. "Use Mercer if extraction fails." The words sat there without apology. Simple, planned, administrative. Caleb felt something inside him go quiet in a way rage never could. He had spent years believing the question was whether he had failed his team. Now the paper said he had been selected in advance to carry the failure if the mission broke, not because he was guilty, because he was useful. Mason's voice was low. "That means the scapegoat condition existed before the ambush." Ross looked at him. "Say it plainly." Mason swallowed. Someone built a fallback narrative around him. Caleb stood slowly, the drawing still in Ross's hand. The chapel seemed to tilt around him. Nolan's tag, the child's picture, the list. Each object pulled another nail from the coffin they had built around his name. But the pain did not become relief. It became heavier. Because if this was true, then the men who died had not simply died in chaos. They had been placed inside someone else's calculation. And the child, whoever she was, had known enough to hide a trail under a step. Caleb walked toward the rear wall, needing air, needing distance from the words on the paper. Rook followed, but not at heel. He moved ahead, nose low, crossing behind the last row of pews. Then the dog stopped at a section of wall where vines had crept through a broken side window. He sniffed the lower boards, scratched once, and looked back. Caleb crouched. At first he saw only dirt, peeling paint, and old water stains. Then his eyes found letters cut low into the wood. Child height. Shallow but deliberate. Not a full sentence at first, just marks. Caleb brushed away dust with his sleeve. Ross came beside him. Mason turned his flashlight on the wall. The words emerged slowly. Lily Cross is not my name. No one spoke for several seconds. The sentence changed the room more than the list had. A list could be military. A tag could be evidence. A drawing could be memory. But this was a child correcting the world. A child insisting that the name attached to her was false. Caleb stared at the carved words until they blurred. Lily, he said, testing the name in his mouth. It did not feel like the whole truth. Ross's expression tightened with the same realization. If Cross was attached to her name in any record, she said, it may not have been identity. It may have been ownership, custody, or control. Mason looked sick. A child was hidden under a general's name? Ross did not answer immediately. Or hidden because of him. Caleb touched the wood beneath the carved sentence, not the letters themselves. He did not know whether the girl had carved it with a nail, a blade, a broken piece of metal, or desperate fingers. He only knew she had been afraid enough to leave proof that she was someone else. Rook sat beside the wall, eyes fixed on Caleb, calm and steady. Caleb felt the old promise return, not as a full memory, but as weight. Stay behind the dog. He'll take you home. He had not taken her home. Not then. Maybe he had tried. Maybe he had failed. Maybe someone had taken her before he could stand. But failure and betrayal were not the same thing. For the first time, Caleb could feel the difference. Ross sealed Nolan's tag, the list, the drawing, and photographs of the carved words. Mason wrote faster now, his earlier caution turning into urgency. Outside, the wind moved through the broken chapel window and made the building creak like it was breathing after years of silence. Caleb remained by the wall a moment longer. The mission chapel had not given him all the answers. It had given him something more painful, proof of a promise, proof of a plan against him, and proof that the child had fought to keep her own name from being erased. When Caleb finally stood, Rook rose with him, facing the door as if ready to lead the way out. The quiet soldier had come back late, but he had come back, and somewhere beyond the chapel, the girl who said Lily Cross was not her name was no longer just a voice in static or a mark in dust. She was real enough to have left words behind. Major Evelyn Ross did not let anyone touch the carved words again after Mason Holt photographed them from every angle. Lily Cross is not my name remained on the lower chapel wall like a child's hand reaching out from years of dust, not asking to be saved anymore, but asking to be believed. Caleb Mercer stood in front of it long after Ross had sealed Nolan Briggs's tag, the drawing, the list, and the oilcloth wrapping into evidence bags. Rook sat beside him, steady and silent, his dark amber eyes turned toward the door as if the Belgian Malinois already understood that the trail no longer ended in that ruined chapel. It had begun there. Caleb wanted to feel closer to the truth, but instead, the truth had made him more afraid. Until now, the missing child had been a voice beneath static, a blue ribbon, a drawing, a carved sentence. Evidence could be held at a distance. A living person could not. If that child had survived, she was no longer a child. She had a life somewhere, a name, a morning routine, maybe people who loved her. And Caleb, the quiet soldier who had promised to take her home, was about to arrive like a storm carrying the worst night of her life back to her front door. On the drive from the chapel, Ross made calls from the passenger seat of the government SUV, while Mason worked through archived adoption records, witness protection fragments, veteran medical referrals, and sealed humanitarian relocation files. It took them 9 hours to find the first real thread. A protected minor entered into a private placement program 15 years earlier under the name Anna Bell. No birth certificate before age 9. No listed biological parents. No military custody record attached. Only a civilian guardianship transfer signed through a legal intermediary. The intermediary's name made Ross go still. Victor Harlan. They found Anna in a small town called Briar Falls, where the streets were lined with maple trees, and the elementary school had painted handprints on the entrance wall. Caleb noticed those handprints before anything else. Red, yellow, blue, green. Dozens of children pressing proof of themselves into paint. He stood outside the school fence with Rook at his side and felt the old chapel pressing against the back of his skull. Ross arrived with Mason in the SUV and spoke first. "We go carefully," she said. "She may not know anything. She may know more than she can handle. Either way, we do not force memory." Caleb nodded, but his throat felt tight. Mason looked at him with a different expression now than the one he had worn at Fort Harrow. Less suspicion, more concern. "You don't have to be the one to speak first," Mason said. Caleb glanced at him. The young investigator's green-brown eyes were earnest, and for the first time, Caleb realized Mason was not just observing the case anymore. He was carrying it. "I made the promise," Caleb said. "Even if I don't remember all of it." Rook leaned lightly against Caleb's leg, as if reminding him that some promises had been carried by more than one soldier. Annabelle stepped out of the school at 3:20 p.m., surrounded by children waving goodbye. She was an American woman around 24 years old, with a slim, gentle build, a soft, oval face, fair skin, clear but quietly sad blue-gray eyes, and long, chestnut-brown hair, worn loose with light, natural waves. She wore a cream knit sweater over a pale blue blouse, dark blue jeans, and simple brown ankle boots, with no heavy jewelry and the modest warmth of a schoolteacher who had learned to make frightened children feel safe. Her smile was soft, but Caleb saw the guardedness behind it, the way her eyes checked faces before settling, the way she flinched slightly when a metal gate clanged shut. Trauma did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it lived in the small pauses between ordinary movements. A little boy ran back to hug her, and Anna crouched to his height without hesitation, speaking to him with patience so natural it hurt Caleb to watch. Whatever had been taken from her, she had grown into someone who protected small hearts. Ross approached first, badge and identification visible but not aggressive. "Miss Bell? My name is Major Evelyn Ross. We're reviewing an old military matter that may involve your early childhood placement. May we speak with you privately?" Anna's smile faded. Her eyes moved from Ross to Mason, then to Caleb, then stopped on Rook. The world seemed to pause around that look. Rook did not move toward her immediately. He stood completely still, ears upright, body calm, focused, obedient. Anna's face changed in a way Caleb could not explain. It was not recognition exactly. It was the pain of recognizing something before the mind had a name for it. "That dog," she whispered. Caleb's chest tightened. "His name is Rook." Anna's hand rose halfway, then stopped. "I've dreamed about him," she said, voice barely above the afternoon noise. "That sounds insane." Caleb shook his head slowly. "No, it doesn't." Rook took one slow step forward, then another, not pulling the leash, not breaking discipline, moving with a gentleness Caleb had only seen around injured children and dying soldiers. When Rook reached Anna, he did not jump, bark, or sniff her hands like a normal dog greeting a stranger. He lowered himself fully to the ground and placed his head across the toes of her brown boots, the exact same protective position he had taken beneath the chapel altar. Anna covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "I know this," she whispered. "I don't know from where, but I know this." Behind her, the school's painted handprints brightened in the late sun, and Caleb felt something inside him break open, not a memory this time, but a certainty. Rook had not come to identify her. He had come to return to the place he once guarded. Anna did not invite them into the school. "Too many children," she said, "and too many questions." Instead, she led them to a small house 3 streets away, where an older woman waited on the porch as if she had seen the government SUV from the window and already knew the past had arrived. Grace Bell was an American woman in her early to mid-60s with a soft, slightly rounded build, a lined, caring face, pale skin, gentle, faded green eyes, and short silver blonde hair styled neatly. She wore a dusty rose cardigan over a cream floral blouse, a long gray skirt, and low brown leather shoes. Her hands trembled against the porch railing, but her eyes were not cold. They were terrified and maternal, the eyes of a woman who had spent 15 years loving a child and fearing the day love would not be enough to protect her. "Anna," Grace said, voice tight, "go inside." Anna looked at her mother. "Mom, do you know them?" Grace's gaze dropped to Rook, and all the color left her face. "I know the dog," she whispered. Inside, the house smelled of lavender soap, paper, and baked bread. Family photographs lined the hallway. Anna at 12 holding a school award. Anna at 16 in a blue dress. Anna at 22 in a graduation gown. Grace beside her in every frame, smiling, but always with the same worried hand resting near Anna's shoulder. Caleb stood just inside the living room, feeling too large, too armed by history, too dangerous for the soft room. He wanted to leave. That surprised him. He had followed gunfire, crossed hostile alleys, entered buildings he knew might not let him out, but this house frightened him more because everyone inside it could be hurt by the truth. Anna sat on the sofa with Rook lying at her feet. She kept looking down at him like a person afraid a dream might disappear if watched too directly. Grace made tea no one drank. Then she sat across from Ross, folded her hands, and told the story she had been warned never to tell. 15 years earlier, a man in a dark coat had come to her door after midnight with a little girl who would not speak. Grace had been a widow, a former foster care volunteer, and a woman known for taking in difficult cases. The man said the girl had survived an overseas emergency, that her parents were dead, that remembering would destroy her, and that questions would put her in danger. Grace asked for documents. The man gave her enough to make the placement legal on paper, but not enough to make it honest. He said her name was Annabelle now, Grace said. Anna's face went pale. Now? Grace's eyes filled. I'm sorry. Caleb looked away. He had seen men wounded in battle with less visible pain than the wound that crossed Anna's face in that moment. Ross asked gently, "Do you remember the man's name?" Grace shook her head. "Not then, but I remember his ring, silver, right hand, a black stone set into it." Mason, standing near the window, looked sharply at Ross. Caleb noticed. Ross did too, but she did not interrupt Grace. "He came back twice a year," Grace continued. "Always polite, always asking if Anna remembered anything, always reminding me that if I loved her, I would let the past stay buried." Anna stood suddenly. "You let a stranger decide my past?" Grace flinched, as if struck. "I let fear decide, and then I loved you too much to know how to undo it." The room went silent, except for Rook's slow breathing. Anna walked to a small cabinet and pulled out a wooden memory box. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were things a child might keep without understanding why. A faded blue fabric strip, a small drawing of a dog with pointed ears, a tiny wooden cross on a worn string, and a notebook filled with repeated phrases in a young girl's uneven handwriting. She handed the notebook to Caleb without looking at him. The same sentence appeared again and again across different ages, sometimes neat, sometimes frantic, sometimes written in the margin of school notes. "Stay behind the dog." Caleb stared until the words blurred. He heard his own voice, not fully, but enough. Smoke in his mouth, Rook barking. A little girl pressed behind him. "Stay behind the dog," Caleb whispered. "He'll take you home." Anna looked at him then, not with trust, not yet, with a question so fragile it hurt. "Did you say that to me?" Caleb's voice nearly failed. "I think I did." She waited. "Did you come back?" That was the blade. Caleb could have defended himself. He could have said he had been wounded, drugged, lied about, used. Instead, he told the only truth he had. "I don't remember coming back, but I never stopped feeling like I'd left someone behind." The knock at the door came before anyone could speak. Grace froze. Rook rose instantly, silent but transformed, every muscle in his lean body alert. Ross moved toward the hallway. Mason stepped aside to give her room. Grace whispered, "No." Caleb looked at her. "Who is it?" Her eyes stayed on the door. "The man with the ring." Ross opened the door only after checking through the side window. On the porch stood Victor Harlan, an American man in his mid-50s with a tall, lean build, a narrow, composed face, sharp nose, cold, dark eyes, neatly combed black hair, streaked with gray, and clean-shaven skin. He wore a tailored dark charcoal suit, a crisp white dress shirt, a muted burgundy tie, and polished black leather shoes. On his right hand was a silver ring set with a dark stone. He looked elegant, controlled, and dangerous in the quiet way of men who never needed to raise their voices because other people had always obeyed them. "Major Ross," he said, as if he had expected her. "You are interfering with a protected civilian placement." His eyes moved to Caleb. "And you are using a traumatized woman to repair your reputation." Rook stepped between Victor and Anna before Caleb could move. A low growl rolled out of the dog, deep enough to make the room feel smaller. Victor's gaze flicked down to Rook, then back to Anna. "Miss Bell, these people are not here to help you. They are here to drag you into a military scandal that will consume your life." Anna's face tightened. Caleb saw the fear in her, and the doubt. Victor had aimed well. Truth did not arrive clean. It arrived carrying damage. Caleb forced himself not to speak over her. Rook held his ground. Grace stared at Victor's ring, her hands trembling harder. "It was you," she said. Victor's expression did not change. "I have handled many placements." Grace's voice broke. "You brought her to me. You told me if I loved her, I would let her forget." Anna turned toward him, and for the first time her softness sharpened into something stronger. "What was my name?" Victor looked at her with a kind of practiced pity. "Your name is Anna Bell," Rook growled again. Anna looked down at the dog, then at the notebook still open in Caleb's hands. "No," she said quietly. "That's the name I was given after everyone stopped asking." Victor left without forcing entry, but his presence remained in the house like cold air. Ross immediately documented the encounter. Mason photographed the ring from the reflection captured in the hallway mirror. Grace sat down as if her bones had given out. Anna stood by the window with Rook beside her, one hand resting lightly on his head. Caleb did not ask her to trust him. He had no right to demand anything from someone whose life had been built on omissions. But before he left, Anna turned and said, "When I was little, I used to wake up crying because I thought I heard a dog barking from far away. Grace told me it was a dream." She looked at Rook. "Maybe it wasn't." Caleb felt the old promise settle across his shoulders again. Heavier but clearer now. The child from Black Hollow had survived. She had grown into a teacher with a gentle voice and a stolen beginning. And the man who had helped steal it had just walked up to her front door wearing the same ring. Grace never forgot. The reopened hearing was no longer held in the small review room where Caleb Mercer had first heard the world crack beneath a child's voice. Major Evelyn Ross moved it to Fort Harrow's central hearing chamber, a larger, colder room with dark wood panels, a raised review bench, rows of hard chairs, and a wall of flags standing stiff behind the officers who still wanted the past to behave like paperwork. Caleb entered with Rook at his left side, the Belgian Malinois steady in his tan tactical K9 vest, deep fawn coat clean against the dull floor, black masked face forward, upright ears catching every whisper. Caleb wore the same complete green digital camouflage uniform, properly fitted and buttoned, plain black belt, and plain black combat boots. No weapon, no vest, no decoration to soften or defend him. His face looked calm, almost unreadable, but inside he felt less like a man walking into judgment and more like a man carrying broken pieces of many lives in both hands. Anna Bell sat behind Ross with Grace Bell beside her. Anna's long chestnut brown hair was pulled loosely over one shoulder, her cream sweater making her look too gentle for a room like this. Grace kept one hand wrapped around Anna's, the protective habit of a mother who had once accepted a lie because it arrived carrying a frightened child. Mason Holt stood near the evidence table with his notebook and camera logs, no longer the skeptical young investigator from the chapel, but a man who had followed doubt far enough to find duty. Dr. Samuel Keene sat with his old leather satchel at his feet, pale and remorseful. Raymond Sutter sat near the aisle, thin shoulders bent, oxygen tube beneath his nose, faded blue eyes fixed on the floor as if every official uniform in the room still frightened him. Derek Vance sat alone on the opposite side, his dark navy jacket neat, his face drawn, his hazel eyes hollow from nights without sleep. Victor Harlan stood near the front in his tailored charcoal suit, silver ring with the dark stone visible on his right hand, his expression controlled, elegant, and quietly hostile. Colonel Warren Pike opened the session with a voice stripped of its earlier certainty. He still looked stern, tall, and square-faced in his formal olive uniform, but the case had changed him. The file he once trusted now sat before him like a weapon that might have been pointed in the wrong direction for years. "This hearing will review newly submitted evidence related to Operation Black Hollow," he said. "The purpose is not speculation, but verification." Victor Harlan rose smoothly before Ross could speak. "Then let us begin with the most obvious concern," he said, his dark eyes moving toward Caleb. "Chief Mercer does not possess reliable memory of the event. He has admitted this repeatedly. His recollections are fragmented, emotionally triggered, and influenced by a service animal, old recordings, and individuals with motives to revise history." The words were polished enough to sound reasonable, cruel enough to find the deepest wound. Caleb felt them land where Victor intended. He did not remember everything. He had spent years fearing that the missing spaces in his mind hid guilt. He had woken from dreams with smoke in his throat and no proof that he deserved forgiveness. Rook shifted closer, shoulder brushing his leg. Caleb did not look down, but the pressure steadied him. Ross did not rush to defend him emotionally. That was why Caleb trusted her. She stood, her dark olive legal service uniform sharp, her gray eyes clear. "Mr. Harlan is correct about one thing," she said. "This case cannot rest on Caleb Mercer's memory alone, so it will not." She moved to the evidence table. "It rests on independent records, physical evidence, witness testimony, recovered audio, medical documentation, and the consistent behavioral responses of a trained military K9 to objects and individuals connected to the original event. The dog is not the proof. The dog led us to proof." The distinction mattered. Caleb saw Pike note it. Ross began with Dr. Keene's original intake note, the one showing Caleb had repeated "the girl" after extraction. She then entered the altered medical file, where the phrase became "the signal." Keene testified again, voice quiet but steadier than before, explaining the unauthorized sedative order, the dosage, and the command signature attached to Adrian Cross. Victor objected twice. Pike overruled him once and allowed limited questioning the second time. The room listened as one changed phrase became a doorway. Then came Ray Sutter. The old communications operator looked too fragile for the witness chair, but when Ross asked him to identify the tape labeled "Ridge Bounce," his voice held. He described the broken relay, Nolan Briggs's fragmented transmission, the order to log only cleared traffic, and the superior officer who vanished after asking questions. He did not make himself noble. He admitted he had been afraid. "I kept a copy because I knew the official channel was lying," he said. "I stayed silent because I was a coward." Victor's voice sliced in during cross-examination. "Or because the tape is incomplete and convenient." Ray looked up then, and for the first time his faded eyes sharpened. "There is nothing convenient about hearing a dying man beg you to save a child and spending 15 years knowing you did not." The room went silent. Caleb closed his hand around Nolan's bracelet in his pocket. Ross played the clean section of Nolan's tape, not the full transmission, only the final recovered line. The chamber filled with static, then Nolan Briggs's broken voice. "Tell Ghost 6. The quiet soldier kept his promise as long as he could. Anna's face changed before anyone spoke. She stood slowly, one hand against the table for balance, her blue-gray eyes fixed not on the speaker, but on Caleb. "That phrase," she whispered. Victor turned sharply. "Miss Bell, sit down." Rook rose before Caleb did, not growling, not lunging, simply standing between Anna and Victor's voice. Anna looked down at the dog, and her hand trembled toward his head. "I called him that," she said. "I didn't know why I remembered those words. I thought it was a dream. But I called him the quiet soldier because he didn't yell when everyone else was shouting." She looked at Caleb again, tears gathering but not falling. "You covered my ears." Caleb's breath stopped. Anna pressed her fingers to her temples as if holding a door open inside her mind. There was smoke. The dog was in front of me. Someone said to stay behind him, and another man kept saying they couldn't let me leave with my real name. Victor's polished stillness cracked for half a second. It was enough for Rook to turn his head toward him with a low, certain sound. Victor recovered quickly. "Trauma memory is suggestible," he said, "especially after exposure to artifacts and emotionally charged narratives." Ross nodded once. "Which is why we moved to documentation." Mason Holt presented the chapel evidence. Photographs of the hollow altar step, the rusted tin, Nolan Briggs's burned tag, the child's drawing, the list containing the line "Use Mercer if extraction fails," and the carved sentence, "Lily Cross is not my name." Mason spoke carefully, identifying preservation conditions, dust patterns, corrosion, and why the objects could not have been recently planted without disturbing the site. He no longer sounded like a man trying to prove Caleb innocent. He sounded like a man defending reality from those who had edited it. Grace Bell testified next. Her voice trembled, but she did not look away from Victor. She described the night Anna had been brought to her door, silent and shaking, with no clear past and documents that looked legal only because the right people had signed them. She described the man in the dark coat, the warnings, the twice-yearly visits, the ring. Ross asked her to identify that man. Grace lifted one shaking hand and pointed directly at Victor Harlan. Him. Victor gave a faint, pitying smile. Mrs. Bell is elderly and frightened. Her memory. No, Anna said, softly but firmly. Everyone looked at her. She reached into her bag and removed the small wooden cross from her memory box. He had this in his hand the night he brought me to Grace. I remember crying because I thought he had taken it from me. She placed it on the table. I remember his ring because it scraped my palm when I tried to take it back. The accusation shifted the room. Victor's eyes darkened, but he remained standing. Sentiment is not evidence, Ross replied. No, but custody logs are. She introduced the civilian placement transfer bearing Victor's legal intermediary code, matched against sealed authorization routing linked to Cross's office. Pike leaned over the document, his stern face tightening. For a moment, the colonel looked older than he had at the start of the hearing. The system he had defended was beginning to testify against itself. Derek Vance had not spoken. He sat with his head bowed, both hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Caleb watched him, not with hatred now, but with the exhausted patience of a man waiting for a weak door to finally open. Ross called his name. Derek stood slowly. He looked at Caleb once, and then looked away. I was part of the support team assigned after the route changed, he said. His voice sounded scraped raw. Victor turned toward him. Mr. Vance, I advise you not to speculate. Derek let out a humorless laugh. You advised me for 15 years. That changed everything. He faced the bench. Lily was not Cross's child. Her father was a local interpreter who discovered unauthorized negotiations tied to the operation. Her mother tried to get her out. Nolan and Caleb found the girl alive. The team was not supposed to know she existed. When they did, the route changed. Caleb felt the room fall away. Derek continued, each sentence costing him. Mercer did not break position to betray the team. He moved because the girl was being taken from the safe point. He tried to stop it. Nolan tried to transmit proof. Cross's people needed someone to carry the failure if the extraction collapsed. Caleb was chosen because he survived wounded and confused. Anna's voice was barely audible. Did my parents die because of me? Derek looked at her then, and his face broke in a way no performance could imitate. No, they died because powerful men were afraid of what they knew. Victor moved as if to object, but Pike raised a hand. Enough! For the first time, the colonel's voice carried anger not at Caleb, but at what had been done around him. Ross requested immediate remote testimony from General Adrian Cross, already subpoenaed under sealed order. The screen at the side of the chamber activated. General Adrian Cross appeared in a dark room, an American man in his late 60s with a tall, commanding build, a long, stern face, pale, weathered skin, piercing gray eyes, neatly combed white hair, and a clean-shaven expression so controlled it felt carved. He wore a dark navy overcoat over a crisp white dress shirt, no medals, no visible decorations. Even through video, he seemed accustomed to making rooms smaller. Ross laid out the evidence without drama. Cross listened, then said, Black Hollow occurred in an unstable theater. Decisions were made to protect broader strategic interests. Caleb felt Rook go still beside him. Ross's voice turned cold. Was Caleb Mercer selected as a fallback subject if extraction failed? Cross's eyes did not move. Operational narratives are sometimes necessary. Pike's face hardened. That is not an answer. Cross looked at the colonel as if disappointed in him. It is the only answer men in command are allowed to give. Anna stood. Her voice shook, but carried. What was my name? Cross said nothing. That silence condemned him more than any confession could have. By the end of the hearing, Pike ordered Caleb's adverse findings suspended pending formal reversal. Victor Harlan detained for obstruction and unlawful concealment tied to the placement. Derek placed under protective custody for full testimony, and all cross-related orders referred to military criminal investigators. It was not a clean ending. No one clapped. No one apologized enough. The dead did not return because a file changed. Anna did not suddenly become whole because people admitted she had been stolen from her own past. Caleb did not feel free in the way stories promised freedom should feel. He felt emptied, as if a burden had been lifted only to reveal the wounds beneath it. After the chamber cleared, Anna approached Rook first. The Belgian Malinois sat calmly, mission-ready even in stillness. Anna knelt and placed both hands on his head. "I don't remember everything," she said, "but I remember feeling safe behind you." Rook leaned forward, pressing his black-masked face lightly against her shoulder. Caleb looked away because the sight hurt too much in a beautiful way. Anna then turned to him. "I don't know what you are to me," she said. "Not yet." Caleb nodded. "You don't owe me that." Her eyes filled. "But I think a part of me waited for you to come back." Caleb could not speak, so he did what he had done years before, perhaps the only thing he could do honestly. He stood quietly beside the dog and let her decide how close to come. Weeks later, they returned to the old mission chapel. Not with soldiers, not with cameras, but with a small group. Caleb, Rook, Anna, Grace, Ross, Mason, and Ray, bundled in a heavy coat, too weak to stand long but determined to see the place where silence finally broke. A small memorial plaque was fixed near the door for Nolan Briggs, Anna's parents, and the unnamed lives erased by Black Hollow. Caleb placed Nolan's bracelet beneath the plaque for 1 minute, then picked it back up. He was not ready to let it go, and no one asked him to. Anna placed the tiny wooden cross beside a fresh blue ribbon. Rook sat in front of the chapel steps, ears upright, watching the tree line with the old patience of a guardian who had completed one mission and would accept the next. Caleb went home to Ash Creek after that, but not as the same man who had left. The nightmares did not vanish. His hands still shook during storms. Some people still stared because truth travels slower than rumor. But when he opened his cabin door in the morning, he no longer felt like a fugitive from his own name. Rook lay on the porch in the pale sunlight, head raised, facing the road. Caleb hung the child's drawing near the door, beside a copy of the cleared order and a photograph of Nolan Briggs smiling in a rain-soaked uniform. At the bottom of the frame, Anna had written one line in careful handwriting. "Some promises survive even when memory does not." Caleb read it once, then looked at Rook. The dog blinked, steady and loyal. Caleb understood then that the truth had not needed him to remember everything. It had only needed one loyal friend to refuse to forget the way home. Sometimes, the truth does not return through power, noise, or human strength. Sometimes, it returns quietly, through a loyal heart, a forgotten promise, and a miracle only God could guide back into the light. Caleb spent years believing his broken memory meant he had failed. Anna lived with a missing past she could not explain. And Rook, the faithful K9 who never forgot, carried a truth no document could erase. Maybe that is how God works in our lives too. Not always through thunder, not always through a clear sign. Sometimes he sends a person, a memory, a loyal friend, or even an animal with a heart brave enough to lead us back home. In everyday life, many of us carry wounds no one sees. We may feel misunderstood, forgotten, blamed, or lost in a story someone else wrote about us. But this story reminds us that no lie is stronger than God's truth. No darkness is deeper than His light, and no promise made with love is ever truly lost. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in loyalty, faith, and second chances. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and let us know what part of Caleb and Rook's journey moved you the most. And if you want more emotional Navy SEAL and K9 stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story. May God bless you, protect your family, guide your steps, and bring light into every place in your life that still needs healing.